The scent of cardamom and wild yeast usually acted as a tether for Silas, a way to anchor the wolf behind a wall of flour and heat. But tonight, the air in the bakery was charged with a static that made the hair on his massive forearms stand at attention. It was the eve of the harvest moon. Outside, the sky was a bruised electric purple, and the wind howling down the alleyway didn't sound like wind at all. It sounded like an invitation. Clara sat at her usual stool, her manuscript forgotten. She was watching Silas work, her eyes tracking the rhythmic, powerful way he kneaded a massive mound of dough. His shirt was stretched tight across his shoulders, dusted in white, his veins standing out like mountain ranges under his skin. "You're twitching," Clara said softly, her voice the only thing that could cut through the growl building in his chest. Silas stopped. He didn't look up. "The moon is full tomorrow, Clara. You shouldn't be here. The street. It gets loud." "I like the loud," she countered, stepping closer. The heat from the ovens was nothing compared to the heat radiating off him. "And I like your bread. Why are you trying to push me out into the rain?" Silas turned then, his eyes flash-frying from hazel to a molten, predatory gold. He leaned over the counter, his face inches from hers, the scent of her jasmine shampoo hitting him like a physical blow. "Because tomorrow night, I don't bake. Tomorrow night, I hunt. Yeah, and if you're in my shop when the pack arrives, they won't see a customer. They'll see a prize." The bell chimed, a harsh, dissonant ring. The door didn't just open, it was thrown back against the wall. A man stood there, taller than Silas, but leaner, dressed in expensive gray wool that couldn't hide the jagged, feral energy rolling off him. This was Fenrris, an alpha from the northern woods who viewed Silas's bakery life as a pathetic surrender to humanity. "So," Fenrris drawled, his nostrils flaring as he caught Clara's scent. "The great silver alpha is playing house. I heard the bread was good, Silas, but I didn't realize you were serving sweets." Silas moved so fast the flour on the counter rose in a white cloud. In a heartbeat he was between Clara and the door, his chest heaving, a low, tectonic vibration rattling the cooling racks behind him. "She is a guest," Silas growled, his voice dropping an octave into a register that felt like a physical weight. "And you are trespassing on my hearth, Fenrris. State your business or leave your hide on the cobblestones." "The pack is restless," Fenrris said, stepping into the warm light, his shadow stretching out behind him like a jagged claw. "They don't want a leader who smells like cinnamon. They want the wolf who tore through the highlands. And they definitely don't want an alpha who hides a human mate in a pantry." Clara didn't run. To Silas's shock, she stepped out from behind his arm. She looked small, fragile, and utterly unafraid. She walked right up to the counter, picked up a serrated bread knife, and began calmly slicing a loaf of dark rye. "The alpha doesn't hide me," she said, her voice steady. "He feeds me. And if you're the pack he's worried about, you look like you could use a carb or two. You're awfully cranky." The silence that followed was deafening. Fenrris stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of a human mocking a wolf king. Silas felt a surge of pride so fierce it nearly broke his human skin. Fenrris lunged, not at Clara, but at Silas. A test of reflexes. Silas caught the other man's throat in a hand that could crush stone, his claws extending just enough to draw a single drop of blood. "Enough," Silas rumbled. "The harvest moon starts at midnight. If you want my seat at the table, Fenrris, you challenge me then. But if you touch a hair on her head, I won't just kill you. I'll burn your memory from the woods." Fenrris sneered, wiping the blood from his neck. "Midnight, then. Let's see if the baker still has teeth." When the door finally slammed shut, the bakery felt smaller, tighter. Silas turned to Clara, his gold eyes slowly fading back to hazel, though his hands were still shaking. "You're insane," he breathed. "You just insulted a primal alpha." "He was rude," Clara said, setting the knife down. She walked over to him, taking his large, flour-caked hands in hers. "And he's wrong, Silas. You don't smell like cinnamon. You smell like home, and home is worth fighting for." Silas let out a jagged breath, pulling her into his chest. He was a creature of the wild, a king of the dark, but in that moment, held by a woman who saw the monster and offered it bread, he felt more powerful than any moon could make him. "Then we don't close early tomorrow?" Silas whispered into her hair. "We bake the moon loaves. We feed the pack. And then I show them exactly what happens when someone tries to take what belongs to the Silver Alpha." Outside, the moon rose, silver and cold, but inside the bakery, the fire was just getting started. The bell above the door didn't chime this time. It shrieked as the wood groaned under the weight of the crowd pushing inside. The midnight air that flooded the bakery was cold, sharp, and carried the scent of pine needles and ancient, unwashed fur. The pack had arrived. There were 20 of them, men and women with eyes that caught the amber light of the ovens and reflected it back as predatory yellow. They filled the cozy space of the silver crumb, their presence making the sturdy timber walls feel like a birdcage. At their head stood Fenrris, his gray wool coat discarded, revealing arms covered in jagged tribal tattoos that pulsed with every heartbeat. Silas stood behind the massive central island, his hands deep in a final batch of dough. He didn't look up. He looked like a man at peace, despite the growls vibrating the glass display cases. "The moon is at its peak, Silas," Fenrris sneered, slamming a fist onto the counter. "The bread is baked. The tribute is laid. Now step aside and let the pack see the little bird you've been nesting with." Clara stood in the shadows of the back kitchen, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could see Silas's profile, the hard set of his jaw, off the way the flour on his skin looked like war paint under the flickering Edison bulbs. "She is not a bird, Fenrris," Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And this is not a nest. It is a sanctuary." He pulled his hands from the dough. Slowly he reached for a heavy, iron-handled peel, the long tool used to slide bread into the deepest reaches of the oven. He didn't hold it like a baker. He held it like a claymore. "The laws of the high woods don't apply here," Silas continued, while stepping around the counter. He was a head taller than any wolf in the room, a mountain of silver-shot muscle. "On this street, I am the law, and I say the girl stays." "Then you challenge the pack for her?" a female wolf hissed from the back, her lip curling to reveal elongated canines. "An alpha who chooses a human over his own blood is no alpha at all." The air in the room suddenly dropped 10 degrees. The smell of yeast vanished, replaced by the overwhelming, a metallic scent of ozone and wet earth. Silas dropped the iron peel. It hit the floor with a clang that silenced every growl in the room. "You want the wolf?" Silas asked. His voice didn't come from his throat. It came from the floorboards, from the walls, from the very foundations of the city. He looked at Clara for one fleeting second, a look of profound apology, and then his body buckled. The sound of his transformation wasn't the cinematic snap of bone. It was the sound of a forest breaking in a storm. His shirt shredded, the seams bursting as his spine lengthened and arched. His skin didn't just change, it darkened, coarse silver fur erupting from his pores like needles. Clara gasped, pressing her back against the brick oven. She watched as the man she had shared coffee with disappeared into a nightmare of muscle and shadow. When the shift was complete, a creature stood where the baker had been. He was a dire wolf, a beast of prehistoric proportions, his back nearly touching the low-hanging copper pots on the ceiling. His fur was the color of a winter moon, his eyes 2 burning suns of pure, molten gold. He didn't growl. He simply breathed, and the force of it blew the flour off the counter. Fenrris stepped back, his bravado vanishing. He had expected a domesticated wolf, a dog softened by the heat of the oven. He hadn't expected the Silver King. The great wolf stepped forward. his claws gouging deep furrows into the hardwood floor. He didn't look at the pack. He looked at Fenrris. With a speed that defied his size, he lunged. The fight was short and brutal. There was no barking, only the sound of heavy bodies slamming into the brickwork and the panicked scattering of the pack. Silas didn't use his teeth. He used his sheer mass to pin Fenrris against the wall, his massive paw pressing into the rival's chest until the wood behind him splintered. The wolf let out a low, vibrating huff, a command, "Leave." One by one, the yellow eyes in the room flickered and dropped. The pack turned, tails tucked, and scrambled out into the rainy night, Fenrris stumbling after them, clutching his broken pride. The bakery fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the ovens and the heavy, ragged breathing of the beast. Silas turned his massive head toward the back kitchen. He looked at Clara, his golden eyes wide, searching her face for the terror he was sure he would find. He took a tentative step toward her, his claws clicking softly on the floor. He looked like a monster. He looked like death. Clara didn't move away. She took a breath, stepped out of the shadows, and walked right up to the massive, wet snout of the wolf. "You're late with the moon loaves, Silas," she whispered, her voice trembling but certain. She reached out, her small hand disappearing into the thick, silver fur of his neck. The wolf froze. Then, with a sound that was half whimper, half purr, he leaned his massive head into her touch, closing his eyes. The alpha of the midnight street had protected his mate, but in the quiet of the flower-dusted shop, it was the mate who had claimed the alpha. The midnight street did not just host a wedding. It witnessed a tectonic shift in the spiritual geography of the city. For centuries, the supernatural denizens of the district had lived by the law of the claw, the cold, uncompromising belief that the strongest survived, the weak served, and the soft were consumed. But when Silas, the silver alpha, stood before a human woman in a dress the color of morning mist, he did more than take a wife. He rewrote the ancient, blood-stained code of the night. The ceremony began at the stroke of 3, the witching hour, that liminal space where the veil between the mundane world and the hidden one becomes thin enough to bleed. So Silas had spent the preceding 72 hours in a fever of creation. He hadn't slept. He had channeled every ounce of his primal, lupine energy into the dough. He was a man possessed, his massive chest slick with sweat and flour, his golden eyes glowing with a steady, unblinking intensity in the low orange light of the ovens. He was baking the agape loaf, a bread so complex, so infused with wild honey, crushed rosemary, and the essence of the moon-blooming jasmine from Bain's shop, so that the scent alone caused the local wolves to weep with a nostalgia they couldn't name. It was a bread that tasted of home, of safety, and of a hunger finally stilled. When the heavy, blackened oak doors of the Silver Crumb swung open, the street was a cathedral of shadows. The rain had slowed to a shimmering mist, a fine diamond dust that caught the teal and violet glows spilling from the neighboring shops. Silas stood at the altar, which was actually a massive, sea-flower-dusted butcher block moved into the dead center of the cobblestone street. He wore a suit of charcoal wool, tailored so precisely to his 280-pound frame that it looked like a suit of modern armor. His hands, calloused and powerful enough to snap a pine trunk, remained bare and dusted with the white powder of his trade. He watched Clara emerge from the shop, and for the first time in his 500 years of wandering the dark places of the earth, the great silver alpha felt his knees tremble. She was a vision of fragile, enduring strength. Her gown was silk, flowing like white water over the rain-slicked stones, and her hair was a crown of braided wheat and silver thread. She didn't walk toward him as a victim to be protected, or a prize to be displayed. She walked toward him as an equal, her dark eyes reflecting the golden fire in his own. "I have spent my life in the cold," Silas began, his voice a resonant cello that vibrated in the marrow of everyone present. He took her hands, his massive fingers dwarfing hers, yet he held them as if they were the last sparks of warmth in a frozen world. I thought my purpose was to guard the dark. I thought my strength was in my teeth and the weight of my shadow. I was wrong. My strength is in this hearth. My purpose is to keep you warm. Before the moon, the stone, and the pack, I vow to be your shield. I will knead the bread that feeds you, and I will hunt the shadows that dare to whisper your name. My soul is no longer mine. It belongs to the flower, the fire, and the woman who saw the man behind the beast. Clara reached up, her thumb brushing a stray fleck of flour from his granite jawline. I didn't come to this street looking for a king, Silas. I came looking for a coffee and a place to hide my stories. But I found a heart that was bigger than the city. You aren't a monster to be feared. You are the sanctuary I've been writing about my whole life. I accept the wolf, I cherish the baker, and I promise to keep your fire burning until the stars themselves go out. They didn't exchange rings of gold. Instead, Silas took a small silver blade, a family heirloom from the old country, and made a tiny, symbolic nick on his palm, then hers. They pressed their hands together over the agape loaf, their blood soaking into the warm, crusty bread. It was a blood bread bond, as an ancient ritual that tied her fragile human life force to the Alpha's eternal protection. As they broke the bread and ate, a roar went up from the rooftops that shook the glass in the skyscrapers 3 miles away. The Silver Crumb was no longer just a bakery. It was the throne room of the Midnight Street. In the decades that followed, the happily ever after of Silas and Clara was not a static, boring ending, but a living, breathing rhythm of shared labor and deep, animalistic devotion. Their life was a beautiful paradox, a domesticity that remained fundamentally feral. Their living quarters above the bakery became a sanctuary of sensory overload. The smell of old parchment, Clara's fountain pen ink, and the stacks of her leather-bound manuscripts mingled with the permanent, comforting scent of toasted grain and Silas's musky, forest-damp fur. Silas insisted on a bed reinforced with custom iron frames, not just for the intensity of their physical connection, although that remained as sharp as a wolf's tooth, but because when he dreamt, his massive frame would often twitch with the memory of the hunt. He refused to let a flimsy human furniture set collapse under his mate. He was a creature of weight and mass, and he guarded her sleep with a terrifying stillness, often staying awake for hours just to watch the rise and fall of her chest. Their working relationship became the engine of the neighborhood. Clara didn't just write her novels. She became the strategist for the Midnight Street Co-op. While Silas focused on the physical labor of the dough, the brutal, rhythmic pounding that kept his wolfish energy channeled into something productive, Clara managed the tributes. When a younger, hot-headed werewolf from a rival pack caused trouble in the local park, Silas didn't need to leave the ovens to fight him. Clara would simply send a notice of trespass wrapped around a cold, day-old baguette. The message was clear to everyone who lived in the shadows. The baker is watching. Behave, or you lose your seat at the table. She was the diplomat. He was the deterrent. Their schedule was inverted from the rest of the world. At 11 p.m., when the city was winding down, Silas would wake. He would roll over, a mountain of shifting muscle, and pull Clara into his chest for 10 minutes of silent scenting. It was a wolfish habit he could never truly break, making sure her skin still carried the musk of his protection before he started the day's work. He would then descend the creaking stairs to the bakery, his bare feet silent on the wood, and begin the symphony of the sourdough. By the time Clara woke up at 2 a.m. to start her writing, the shop was a warm, fragrant cloud of yeast, cinnamon, and the low, rumbling hum of Silas singing old folk songs from the mountains in a language that didn't exist anymore. On the nights of the full moon, the bakery closed its doors. Silas didn't go to the woods. He didn't need to. He would shift in the small walled garden behind the shop, a beast of silver and shadow that stood 7 feet tall at the shoulder. Clara would sit on the back porch with a cup of tea and a notebook, watching him. The massive wolf would pace the perimeter of the fence, his eyes 2 glowing embers of gold, guarding her from shadows that only a creature of his lineage could perceive. Sometimes he would bring her tributes, a rare, night-blooming orchid he'd found in an alley or a piece of polished sea glass. He would drop them at her feet with a huff of pride, then curl his massive, warm body around her chair, a living rug that vibrated with a deep, contented purr. They eventually took on apprentices, lost kids who had fallen through the cracks of both the human and supernatural worlds. Silas taught them that a man's hands were for creating, not just destroying. He showed them that the same heat that could burn a forest could also rise a perfect sourdough. He was a stern teacher, his growl still capable of making a grown man freeze, but his kitchen was the only place these children ever felt safe. Clara, in turn, taught them the power of the word, and she filled their heads with stories where the monsters were the heroes, and the different were the ones who saved the day. Under their combined guidance, the Midnight Street thrived. It became a pocket of peace in a world that was often anything but. As the years passed, Silas's hair, once dark with silver streaks, turned entirely white, matching the fur of his wolf form. Clara's face gained the fine lines of a life well lived and well laughed, but her eyes never lost their sharp, investigative spark. They were the undisputed legends of the district. Travelers would come from across the globe, guided by rumors and secret maps, just to catch a glimpse of the massive man with the flour-dusted hands and the woman with the ink-stained fingers standing together at the window as the sun went down. They were the living proof that the niche wasn't just a category on a shelf. It was a community built on the radical idea that love could bridge the gap between the moon and the sun. One evening, as the first autumn frost began to pattern the windows of the shop, Silas pulled a tray of cinnamon knots from the oven. He looked at Clara, who was sitting at her desk finishing the final chapter of her latest book. He realized that the shadow on the wall he had feared as a young, angry wolf wasn't something to escape anymore. It was a guardian. It was a husband. It was a legacy. He walked over to her, his gait still heavy and powerful, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. The scent of cinnamon, old books, and forever hung in the air, thick and sweet. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice a low, loving rumble. Clara looked up, her eyes bright with the reflection of the oven's fire. She took his hand, the hand of the wolf, the hand of the baker, and pressed it to her cheek. "It's just beginning," she whispered. Outside, the moon rose over the Midnight Street, casting a silver glow over the sign of the Silver Crumb. The street was alive. The monsters were at peace. And for the first time in history, the Alpha was exactly where he wanted to be.